Today, Ryan's kicking off Project Nightrain. He's pulling the engine and trans out of an '87 Chevy 1500. Then, it's a TV first as he wedges in a massive 6.6-liter Duramax diesel and an Allison 6-speed automatic transmission. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Closer than I thought. Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Well, today I've got a smile on my face because we are kicking off a super cool new project. Now, we've been wanting to build up one of these body-style Chevy trucks for quite some time now. There's just so many different cool things you can do to them, and they're still affordable. Now, they made these trucks from 1973 all the way up to 1987, meaning there's a bunch of them out there. Having said that, well, finding a good one for a good price can still be a challenge. This one has a nice paint job on it, the interior's clean, it's not all rusty, and it runs well. And the fact that we paid less than $5 grand for it, well, we're already off to a great start with this project. Now, this one is a 1987, meaning it was the last year of production for these trucks, but the first year of fuel injection for Chevy pickups. But the fuel we're going to be spraying into the combustion chamber isn't gasoline. We're going to be spraying some diesel. So let's go check out our cool new power plant. This beast is a turbocharged 6.6-liter Duramax V8 out of a 2007 Chevy 2500. Now, in stock form, this engine makes 360 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. Pretty impressive for a stock engine. But you guys that are into Duramaxes or diesels in general know that you throw a few bolt-on parts at this thing along with the tune, and you can easily get another 100 horsepower. And if you throw some hard parts at it, you can make some pretty impressive power with these things. Now, you guys might be asking, where do we get all these used engines and transmissions and other salvage yard parts? Well, I'll show you. Now, to locate our donor engine and transmission, we simply went to partslocator.com, entered in the year, make, and model of the vehicle we're looking for, told that we were looking for a complete engine assembly, and since we're after an LBZ, we selected that, entered our zip code, and hit locate. Now, this is searching a bunch of different automotive recyclers throughout the country. And once it's done, we'll see all the options available to us. Now, ours happen to come from Tennessee Auto Salvage up in Greenbrier, Tennessee. But it looks like no matter where you are in the country, you've got a bunch of different options. You can find what you're looking for and even compare prices. Now, if you've got access to a loading dock or you're working with a repair shop, well, most of these guys will ship parts right to you. And it's a good thing because that sucker is heavy. Now, after zeroing the scales to account for our jack stands, let's set this sucker down and see what it weighs. All right. Looks like we're coming in at about 965 pounds. Now, this is a fully dressed engine. The only things missing are the alternator and the starter. Otherwise, this thing is complete, and it probably weighs about 30 to 40% more than the small block it's going to replace. So we're going to have to compensate for that weight, but the trade-off in weight is going to be made up for in torque. Now, transferring all that torque to the rear tires is the factory-installed and matching Allison 1000 6-speed automatic transmission. Now, in addition to the complete engine with all the accessories and the automatic transmission, we also picked up a complete uncut engine wiring harness and the PCM. Now, those two items we've already boxed up and sent off to a shop called BT Diesel Works so they can strip the harness down and make it a standalone harness that'll work great in our old Chevy. They're also going to reflash the PCM to make sure we don't get any annoying warning lights, and they're going to modify the tune for a little bit more power. Now, like you've seen, the truck that we're going to be shoehorning that Duramax and Allison drivetrain combo into is this '87 Chevy 1500. It's a regular cab, short bed, two-wheel drive truck. Not exactly what you imagine when somebody mentions a high-powered diesel rig, but that's what's going to make it cool. It's going to be different. Now, the gas V8 and automatic underneath the hood still have some life left in them. The truck's got 176,000 miles on it, but that life is going to have to get lived elsewhere because we're going to get right to it and yank out that drivetrain so we can get started on our diesel conversion. Now, for the most part, the paint job on this old thing looks pretty good, but we do have a little bit of clear coat peeling on both the hood and on the roof. On the roof, it's going to get fixed and blended in, but the hood is just going to get replaced. We're going to end up going with a cowl hood so we can make a little extra room for that giant diesel. Now, this thing is a cool midnight blue color, and when it's done, it's going to haul like a freight train. So we're going to call this thing Project Nightrain. Plus, it's a little bit of a tribute to one of the best songs from one of my favorite rock and roll bands, Guns N' Roses. Now the first thing we're going to do is get rid of the factory hood and make some room to work. Now we don't have any plans for these parts on the truck that are coming off, but doesn't mean we want to damage them in the process. We're going to carefully disassemble things to avoid that. You can sell these parts online, or you can donate them to a friend who needs them more than you do. You can see on the underside of the truck, there's not a whole lot of rust. A little bit of surface rust here and there, but it's not bad for a truck of this age. Now on a big teardown job like this, I like to remove the parts that contain fluids last. It just minimizes the amount of mess you make in this kind of messy job. Now we're pulling the engine and transmission together as a combo. It takes a little extra effort this way, but at least we can throw it on a pallet when we're done and get it out the door.
After the break, Ryan's taking a stab at the first test fit of the Duramax. And later, we'll see just how much room we've got for the Allison transmission. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now we've got the drivetrain pulled out of our '87 Chevy pickup, and we're about to haul it out of the shop and get rid of it. But before we did that, we wanted to throw it up on the scales and see what it weighed. Now the 6.6 liter Duramax that's going to replace it weighs in at 965 pounds. But this thing is 760 pounds. That's the engine, transmission, and all the accessories. Now the diesel was complete with all the accessories, but without the transmission. So we're already adding over 200 pounds to the front end of this truck. We haven't even weighed the trans yet. Now in addition to our 965-pound diesel engine, our new transmission weighs in at about 350 pounds. Bringing our new drivetrain total to about 1,315 pounds. The drivetrain that came out of our Chevy was about 760 pounds, and that's approximately a 73% increase in drivetrain weight. That's substantial, and it's going to have an effect on front ride height, the suspension, and the overall weight bias of the truck. Now, in addition to being a heavier transmission, this thing's also physically larger. It's a lot taller than the transmission it's replacing. So I'm sure I'm going to have to do some transmission tunnel surgery to get this thing to fit. Might have to carve up the firewall as well. But we knew all these things going into this project, and we'll just deal with them as we go. Now, before I even get started mocking up the new power plant, I'm going to get rid of a few unnecessary parts and a lot of grease and grime. Now, along with cleaning up the engine bay, I've also removed half of the AC box and the evaporator. The reason is I'm hoping that once that engine's in place, there might be enough room to sneak those parts back into position and we'll be able to retain some of the factory AC components. The brake booster, well, it's still there for the same reason. I'm hoping it doesn't hit the engine. If it does, we'll get rid of it and install a hydro boost brake setup. But there's only one way to find out what hits and what doesn't. It's by lowering this behemoth into position. I love our Kundal crane. Now we are really lucky to have our overhead crane, but you can still get this job done with a heavy-duty cherry picker. But if you're going that route, you probably want to remove the inner and outer fenders and the front end to give you a little bit more working room. Now I'm just trying to ease the engine into position. I don't want to damage anything. But you can see that the oil pan, which is aluminum, is about to hit the steering linkage. All right, that's probably about as far down as it's going to go. All right, where's the jerk that thought this was going to be a good idea? This thing is huge. All right, now the engine is mostly in the engine bay, but it's hitting the brake booster and the steering linkage is hitting the oil pan. I've still got to go back towards the firewall about 5, maybe 6 inches. So I'm going to get rid of this brake booster, see if we can slide it back a little bit and see what that buys us. Now before I remove the brake booster, I'm going to separate it from the master cylinder. And to make sure I don't spill a bunch of corrosive brake fluid all over everything, I'm going to go ahead and drain the fluid that's in the reservoir. To do that, I'm going to use this vacuum brake bleeder that we picked up from Matco. This tool makes quick work of removing the brake fluid, and it sure beats the old turkey baster I used to use. Now, if you happen to get some brake fluid on paint, don't panic, just dilute it right away with water. So the sucker should come right off. All right, now it's starting to look like this might work. Now with the brake booster out of the way, our giant Duramax fits down into the engine bay better. Not great, but better. However, if you look at a profile shot across the top of the fenders where the hood would be, it's pretty obvious we've got a problem. Now we are going to be installing a cowl hood, so that'll help. But I still think I can get the engine to sit a couple of inches lower in the engine bay with a little bit of work.
Up next, looks like the oil pan's gotta go. Stick around.
Pretty clean in there. That's a good sign. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now, like we mentioned, I want the engine sitting lower in the frame rails. We had a couple of things working against us. The factory engine mounts on our Duramax were resting on the frame plates that tie in the cross member and the frame rails on our 87, and that's what was holding the engine up. The other thing working against us was the aluminum oil pan. It was either touching or really close to touching both the cross member and the steering linkage. Now, these Duramax engines have the oil pump up front and the oil pump pickup here in the rear sump. So I'm thinking I can get another 1.5 inches of real estate by notching the front of this aluminum pan. But there's only one way to find out. That's by removing the pan and seeing what we've got to work with. Now, to get to some of the upper oil pan bolts, we had to remove the flex plate or the flywheel. It's usually a pretty straightforward job, so we didn't bother getting any footage of it. But in the process, I discovered that these are some of the tightest bolts I've ever encountered while wrenching on cars and trucks. So tight, it involved an extra long breaker bar and 2 very long pry bars to get the job done. It also involved me, our videographer, and the producer of the show, which is also why we don't have any footage of it. So if you're doing this job in the driveway, just know going in, these bolts are really tight and be prepared. Eat your Wheaties too. Now I've still got the engine suspended by the crane. I'm just using the 2 screw jacks as a little extra insurance and a little extra stability. Now even with all the lower oil pan hardware removed, well, it was pretty content where it was. And I don't want to damage the mating flange by using a big pry bar to just pry it away from the upper oil pan. So I'm using a couple of scraper tools and a utility knife to slowly pry the pan away and cut the gasket little by little. I can hear it breaking free. Now the upper pan is more of the same, except not all of the bolts are accessed from the exterior of the pan. Some you can only get to once you remove the lower oil pan. And you don't want to forget any either. If you leave some in the back and start prying on the front, you could warp or even break the aluminum cast oil pan. I'm not sure what kind of gasket, adhesive, or sealant they use because there is no pan gasket, but it definitely is good stuff. This engine's got over 200,000 miles on it, and neither the upper or lower pan had any signs of any leakage. Pretty clean in there. That's a good sign. All right, now with the oil pan out of the way, we can finally get a good look at what we're working with. And the oil pump pickup tube sits about 2 inches below the oil pan mounting surface on the block. And the front of the oil pan, well, it's about 4 inches deep. So I know we've got about 1.5 inches of pan that we can section and still be in good shape. But before I get to cutting on the oil pan, I'm going to go ahead and drop the engine back into position so I can measure exactly how much needs to be cut and how deep into the pan the notch needs to extend. Goodness gracious. This thing is huge. All right, now by notching the pan, we'll definitely be able to get nice and low. Now this tape measures about 3/4 of an inch wide, so we might have to go back another ½ inch or so for some wiggle room, but I think we're in pretty good shape. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now today has been all about trying to wedge the giant 6.6 liter Duramax diesel underneath the hood, or mostly underneath the hood, of our '87 Chevy pickup, Project Nightrain. Now when we first lowered the diesel down into the engine bay, it looked like it was going to be mission impossible. But after a little bit of work, a few modifications, and a plan for a cowl hood, it looks like it's going to work out surprisingly well. You can actually see all the bell housing bolts, so that's a good sign. And we've got a fair amount of room around the oil pan, and once it's notched, we should be good to go. We've also got good clearance around the exhaust manifolds, and the single exhaust outlet is in a good spot as well. We've also got room for our oil filter, even after the frame gets boxed for strength. But I will have to do a little bit of trimming here on the pinch seam for exhaust clearance. And with a few parts out of the way, like the '87 frame mounts, it looks like I'll be able to use the GM or Duramax engine mounts. I'll just have to fabricate a couple of plates for the mounts to sit on, which looks like it will be no big deal. And now that we've got the engine position kind of dialed in, well, it's time to jack up this school bus-sized transmission to see if it has any hope of fitting underneath the factory floor. I'm not that optimistic. Coming closer than I thought. All right, that's up against the floor. And we're a little short, but not much. Now at the front of the transmission, we're already about an inch short from the bell housing bolts lining up. Here at the back of the Allison, well, I'm up against the factory floor, and the rear of the transmission has to come up another couple of inches to level the drivetrain out. So I certainly have some transmission tunnel rearranging to do. No big deal, nothing some metalworking tools can't fix. Overall, I'm really pleased with how our heavy-duty diesel drivetrain is fitting in our half-ton light-duty truck. Project Nightrain is off to a pretty good start.
Today, we're back on Project Nightrain. Ryan's making room in our '87 Chevy 1500 for a Duramax diesel and Allison transmission. He's cutting out the trans tunnel, welding in new engine mounts, and proving that this 6.6 liter monster can fit under a stock hood. Then he's boxing the frame for extra strength. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Today we are going to make a permanent home in our 1987 Chevy 1500 for our swapped-in 6.6 liter LBZ Duramax diesel and 6-speed Allison automatic transmission. Now when we had this thing in the shop last, we were in the test fit stage. I made some room in the engine bay, cleaned things up a little bit, cut a chunk in the cast aluminum oil pan, and set the engine as far down into the engine bay as it would go. But we still had a few parts on top of the engine sticking out above the hood by a few inches. And since then, I've had a chance to get some work done. Now to seal up the pan, I just used a piece of 1/8-inch aluminum plate that I bent and obviously trimmed to fit. Now welding it up wasn't that much fun. I kept fighting impurities or whatever in the cast aluminum that kept floating to the surface. But I got it done, it turned out pretty good. And before I installed it, I went ahead and leak tested it and checked the pan rails for straightness. Both of those things checked out, so I went ahead and sealed things up and installed the upper and lower pan. Now, I'm sure some of you guys are wondering if we've affected engine oil capacity by removing a small section from the front of the pan. And I'm sure we did to a small extent, but probably less than a quart. Now, in addition to the extra clearance we gained, there's another benefit to this as well. When doing an oil change, well, the drain plug is in this rear section of the pan, and all the old oil will drain away. But whatever's trapped in the front of here is going to get stuck and mixed with your fresh oil. So hopefully we've eliminated some of that old oil and new oil problem. Now to get the oil pan on and off, we had to get access to a couple of the bolts, meaning we had to remove the flywheel or flex plate. Now, GM uses single-use torque-to-yield fasteners, and we've replaced them with quality ARP 12-point fasteners that are reusable. Now I've gone ahead and made up some engine mounts using heavy wall rectangular tubing and some 1/4-inch plate, and they work with the factory Duramax engine isolators. I've got them tacked into position so I could drop the engine in place and hang the transmission off the back to see how much of the transmission tunnel I needed to cut, which was a pretty big piece. But it's a pretty big transmission that's going in there, and at least we can use this piece to scab the floor back together. And with a giant hole cut in the cab floor, you can see how easy it would be to get to all the bell housing bolts. In fact, I may make this panel removable so I can do just that. That's pretty close. I can start threading bolts in. Now, if you're doing a diesel swap like this at home and you don't want to cut up the factory floor like we did, we could always do a body lift. That way you don't have to cut up any factory sheet metal. And if our truck had been a four-wheel drive, that's probably the route we would have taken. And with the transmission jacked up into position, we can secure it with a few bolts. And it's a good thing they're easy to get to. Oh, of course. All right, that's plenty for mock-up. All right, for now, just using this piece of old 2x2 steel to hold the transmission up while I make an actual cross member. Now for the ends of the cross member, I'm using some 3-inch 3/16 angle iron. And when designing a cross member for a project like this early on in the process, keep in mind that there's going to be a giant exhaust system running in between the transmission and the frame rail. So make sure you account for that. Plate I made, at least movable. All right, then these crossbars on either side of that pad and weld to the angle iron. Give me enough room to get a socket in there. Make sure it's even on both sides. All right, grab the welder. Whew! That was a little warm, believe it or not. Always wear welding protection. All right, with the transmission position pretty much locked in, we can take a look at some of the other clearances, like in between the modified aluminum oil pan and the steering linkage. We've got plenty of room, which tells me that if I need to, I can come in and cut down the custom engine mounts to allow the engine to sit a little bit lower in the engine bay, maybe by up to a ½ inch or so, and still have the clearance we need. But before we do anything, I'm going to set the truck down on the ground so we can take a look at things. Now up top, things are looking pretty good. Oh, and for you guys that are curious on whether or not the front of this truck would get flattened by the immense weight of our 1,300-pound diesel engine and heavy automatic transmission, well, check it out. This thing is on the front suspension right now, and while it could certainly use some firmer shocks, it's not crushing the stock front suspension, and it's probably sitting about where the factory ride height was. This thing's turning out better than I thought it would. All right, time for the moment of truth.
After the break, we'll prove you don't have to do a body lift to make this power plant fit. And later, we'll get our frame boxed where it counts. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech, where we've got Project Nightrain in the shop, welding in engine and transmission mounts for our Duramax diesel and Allison automatic. Now with our modified oil pan and transmission tunnel, we've got the engine and transmission sitting where we want it, nice and low in the truck. And all the clearances look pretty good underneath. However, up top, there's a couple of things we've got to deal with, like the fuel filter. Now for now, I've got it temporarily relocated to the forward bolt hole in an effort to try to keep the factory AC box. And on the other side, there's no way I'm going to get a vacuum brake booster to fit. It's simply too large. What I'm going to do is modify a late model Chevy Hydro Boost system, and it simply uses hydraulic pressure from the power steering pump to assist in the application of the brakes instead of vacuum. And other than that, we're in pretty good shape. And after removing a couple of kind of unnecessary parts from the top of the engine and going with some custom plumbing, we've actually achieved a pretty low profile. Now, common belief when doing an engine swap in this body style truck is you've got two options for hood clearance, either a custom hood or a body lift. And if this was a four-wheel drive truck, we'd go with a body lift and be done with it. But it's not. It's a two-wheel drive street truck, and we want a nice, clean look. Now, with the modified oil pan, I don't even think we need a custom hood. I'm sure we can get away with a small cowl hood. We might even be able to fit the stocker back on here. Let's give it a shot. Ready? All right, time for the moment of truth. And it looks like the hood barely clears. We've got a little bit of room over top of the alternator and this fitting. But if we wanted to run the stock hood, we could just cut another ½ inch or so out of the engine mounts, lower the engine down that much, and we'd be gold. But like we've mentioned before, this hood needs some paint work, and we want to run a cowl hood just for the more aggressive looks. But if you did this engine swap, kept the stock hood and the stock ride height, you'd have one heck of a sleeper on your hands. Now to burn in our homemade engine mounts, I'm firing up our 220-volt welder. And the driver's side and passenger side engine mounts both hang behind the crossmember. So on the passenger side, I'm just forcing the plate to go where I want it and then welding it up. The driver's side, I'll eventually tie it in to the frame rail that's going to get plated. Permanent. Now with the engine mounts fully welded in, we can move on to boxing in this open C-channel frame. Now most of the chassis rigidity comes from this vertical portion. And if we can add a second vertical plate to the inside of the frame, we can increase the stiffness a fair amount. Step 1 is making a template. And since I only want to do a small section of the frame rail at a time, I'm just using 3 pieces of template cardboard we had laying around. Cardboard any thicker is just too difficult to work with, and cardboard any thinner is basically paper. And with the template cut out, now's a good time to double check its fitment. You don't want to transfer this to metal and not have the opportunity to make small adjustments, which are a lot easier to do right now. Cut it off right here, nice and square. And a little more trimming along this bottom edge. Now I'm using 1/8-inch plate to reinforce the frame rails. And to cut it out, you can use any number of methods. You can use a bandsaw or a plasma cutter, but I like using a cutoff wheel on our angle grinder because I get a nice clean cut that doesn't have to be dressed later.
Up next, we'll install our new fuel tank. Stick around.
Then we can jack the tank back into position and attach it to the frame rails. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop, where we're in the middle of plating the frame rails on our '87 Chevy 1500. Now before I plate the frame rail, I've got to weld the nuts to the transmission crossmember to the inside of the frame. Otherwise, they wouldn't be accessible once the frame is plated. And to give myself some clean metal to work with, I'm knocking off any rust or paint from the edges of the C-channel frame. To do that, I'm simply using a flap wheel on our 4.5-inch angle grinder. Then I can start positioning the reinforcement plate and welding it into place. Now the frame isn't straight or square or even, and this flat piece of steel is going to have to be contoured to match the frame rail. It's nothing drastic, but it is going to have to be massaged into position. And what I'm basically trying to do is to create a small gap in between the reinforcement plate and the frame. That'll give me a good 90-degree shelf to lay the weld on. And it won't leave me a bunch of excess weld to grind off. Now luckily the 1/8-inch plate is pretty easy to work with. And a couple of large locking pliers or vice grips can help you get things into position. Persuade that a little bit with a hammer. Just a little fine tuning. Looks pretty good. A little gap there, but that's okay. Everything else looks pretty good. And that small gap can be closed up pretty easily with a few taps from a hammer. Then we can get to work fully welding this plate in. All right, now with this section of frame rail fully welded, all I've got left to do is come in here and grind these welds down smooth so it looks a little nicer. But I've obviously got a lot more work to do. But I'm not going to plate each frame rail from bumper to bumper. There's no point in that. All we really want to do is stiffen up the chassis in between where the engine is and where the rear axle is, because that's what's trying to twist under power. Now, if you plated the frame rails in between the cross member and the front bumper, all you're doing is stiffening up the crumple zones. If you got into a front-end collision, instead of this area deforming and absorbing the impact, it's just going to transfer more of the load back into the rest of the vehicle. Clearly not what you want. Well, I'm going to take a break from cutting and welding for now because we've got a fuel tank to throw in this truck. Now, the stock fuel tank in our truck is made from steel. That's why it's got a little bit of surface rust on it. Now, from the factory, these things were installed on the outside of the frame rail, just behind the driver's side door. Maybe not the best spot for a tank full of gasoline. Now, we could get this thing to work with our diesel setup just by taking out the electric fuel pump and installing a simple fuel feed line. But we wanted to upgrade to this tank we picked up from Brothers Truck Parts for a couple of reasons. One, it's aluminum. It looks good and it'll never rust. And two, well, with our diesel swap, we've put a lot of extra weight over the front of the truck. So it'll be nice to offset some of that with this tank, which gets installed behind the rear axle. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit better traction with more weight over the rear tires. Now, this thing holds 19 gallons, it's baffled, takes a standard sending unit, and it's going to get filled through a hole we cut in the bed floor.
When we come back, we're doing away with the old gas tank and adding a new diesel tank between the frame rails in the back.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop, where we're about to install a new aluminum fuel tank in Project Nightrain. But before we can bolt it in place, we've got to cut out the original spare tire crossmember. Now, we've shown you this before, but it's worth showing again. That's because it's a really effective method of removing the stubborn, pressed-in factory rivets. Now, using a cutoff wheel on our angle grinder, I'm just making a small X pattern in the rivet head. Sometimes larger rivets take a little extra cut. But with a couple of slices in the rivet head, it allows an air chisel to knock what's left of the rivet head right off. Then you can use a hammer and punch to knock the rivet out, or a different bit on the air hammer to get the same thing done. This method is a little noisy, but it sure is effective. Then we can jack the new fuel tank into position and use the supplied mounting strips to help locate the holes we're going to drill in the flange, both on the tank and on the frame rail. A quick measurement verifies that we've got our tank square. Then we can lower it out of the way so we can drill on it on a bench top. And after drilling an 1/8-inch pilot hole, I'm using a step bit to open it up to the correct size. Then I'm using the mounting strip that's been bent to match the mounting flange to mark the other two holes. Again, using an 1/8-inch pilot hole and a step bit. I'm also using the step bit to kind of deburr the hole on both sides. The same process is used on the frame rail. Then we can jack the tank back into position and attach it to the frame rails using our freshly painted mounting strips. All right, now with our new aluminum fuel tank bolted into position, all we've got left to do is a couple of small things to finish up the installation, like add our fuel level sending unit, cut a hole in the bed floor for the filler neck, and add our fuel fill cap. All stuff that came from Brothers Truck Parts. But I'll get to that stuff later. For now, I've got a couple of frame rails that I need to finish plating.
Today, we're adding a new cowl hood and roll pan to Project Nightrain. We'll get our paint matched for the hood and for blending it in on the bed corners. Then we'll dress up the front end to match our new look. And finally, we'll top off the bed with a new tonneau cover. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Today we are back on Project Nightrain, our Duramax diesel swapped two-wheel drive 87 Chevy 1500. Now today we want to install our modified engine wiring harness and PCM along with making this truck look a little bit better. We want to add a cowl hood and a roll pan, remove some of the extra polished aluminum trim, and add a handful of other appearance parts. And that hood and roll pan are going to need paint work. So to help us out today is a new guy in the shop. This is Jeremy Bumpus. He's a paint and body pro, and trust me when I tell you, he knows what he's doing.
This is the steel cowl hood we picked up from Brothers Truck Parts. Now obviously if we were doing a show truck, we would do this a little differently. We would prime and block it a couple of times until we got it laser straight. But since we're not working with a show truck, we just have a few simple issues we want to address before we're ready to scuff and shoot. So we'll start with an imperfection like this, which is an easy fix. Step one is to rough up the surface with a coarse grit sandpaper to give the glazing putty something to adhere to. Now it doesn't take much, and once it sets up, we'll hit it with some 180 grit sandpaper on a hard sanding block. You'll know it's ready for primer when you can run your hand across it, you don't feel any imperfections, and you know it's flat. The hood only had a couple of spots that I wanted to address. The rest of the hood would get hit with a red scuff pad. All right, ready for a little primer. All right, we'll blow the dust off this thing, get a little primer on it.
Now, one of the reasons we purchased Project Nightrain was because it had been painted not too long ago. The problem is the guy we bought it from didn't lay down the paint himself and he was unsure of the exact color used. So we've got Brian here from Single Source to scan this thing to make sure we get a good color match.
What Brian's doing is a simple process. He's getting a very detailed picture of the paint on this truck where he can take it back to his shop, mix us up the paint we need, and we're ready to paint this thing.
It's PPG's Rapid Match spectrophotometer. It takes a 6-angle photo of the paint surface to pick up the pearls, pick up the metallics, even the orientation and size of metallics. It actually cuts off all the light source, so it picks up nothing but what's on the car. And it pulls the paint image up. We download it at our store. It runs through PPG's database with about 600,000 colors. It may pick a factory color, it may pick a color that's been changed.
Now after spot priming and wiping it down with wax and grease remover in the shop, the next step is to wipe it down with a tack cloth to remove any dirt or lint. Now when I spray sealer, I like to spray at about 35 psi at the inlet of the gun with a 1/4 tip. Now I'm looking for about a 10 to 12 inch fan pattern, and I'm also doing a 50 to 60% overlap with the gun about 8 inches off the panel. Now after Brian came out and scanned her truck, it came back as a PPG Deltron Ocean Blue. Now essentially all my gun settings are the same, 35 psi at the inlet of the gun with a 1/4 tip. Unlike spraying my sealer, which was a full wet coat, I'll start my base off with a medium coat. Now if I were to start this off with a full wet coat, and this being a metallic based paint, it may cause our metallics to bunch up, making the paint blotchy. And what I mean by blotchy is an inconsistent finish that'll be noticeably different than the rest of the truck. Now after about 15 minutes of flash time, we're ready for a second coat. And all my gun settings are the same. This time I'm doing just a little more than a medium coat. Another good technique you can use to keep your metallics uniform is to alternate passes. My first pass was the length of the hood front to back. My second pass was across the hood side to side, and this will help prevent striping. After 3 or 4 coats of base and about a 15 to 20 minute flash time, we're ready for clear. This is PPG's 2021 Concept Clear, which mixes 4 to 1 to 1 with activator and reducer. Something I like to do when spraying clear is I like to bump the pressure up to about 40 psi. I feel like this helps atomize the clear better, which helps prevent so much orange peel. For this hood, we'll put on about 4 coats, which gives us plenty in case we need to wet sand and buff later.
After the break, we'll get our roll pan welded in and painted. And later, we'll add some all-new bright work to freshen up the front end style. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, Jeremy's got our cowl hood all painted up, and it turned out great. Can't wait to see it installed. But before we do that, we've got some work to do at the rear of the truck. We want to install a roll pan and clean up the looks a little bit.
Just like our hood, we picked this roll pan up from Brothers Truck Parts. And we thought about making it a bolt-on, but the amount of time it would take to fabricate a couple of brackets and get it bolted on, we thought we'd just go ahead and weld it on and smooth it up back here. And what allows us to do this is this trim piece, which gives us a good break for our paint. If this trim piece wasn't here, we would have to try to blend into the bedside or possibly paint the entire bedside. But before we can tack on this roll pan, we need to notch out the factory panel to clear the license plate box. Now when cutting sheet metal, I like to use the 3-inch cutoff wheels that we get from Industrial Depot. All right, looks pretty good. Ready to prep this thing and tack it in. Now the first step in getting this roll pan ready to weld on is to remove any existing paint and get down to clean metal. But when it comes to the E-coat on your new roll pan, there's mixed reviews on whether to leave it or not. Personally, I like to remove the E-coat before getting the roll pan ready to weld on. With the roll pan in place, we're ready to tack it on. Then it's a process of jumping around using spot welds so we keep the heat down and don't warp the metal. And also working it with a body hammer to keep the roll pan flush with the bed corner. Now to knock the welds down, I'm using a 40 grit flap wheel. Now that the roll pan is fully filler worked and in primer, I'm blocking it with 180 followed by 320, prepping it for paint. All the steps for painting the roll pan are essentially the same as painting the hood. The only difference here is that we're doing a blend on the lower bed corners. Once I've got my sealer fully covered, the next step is to start blending the new paint with the old. And this is accomplished by gradually stepping our base down. We want to make sure not to paint the entire bed corner, but we want to go halfway to 3/4 of the way down. What this achieves is a visually seamless transition from the new paint to the old. After a few coats of base, we'll hit it with 3 or 4 coats of clear and we're done.
Now this is the original wiring harness that came on our junkyard Duramax and Allison drivetrain combo. We sent it off to the guys at BT Diesel Works and they did a great job modifying it and making it a standalone harness. There's 2 sections to it. On the underhood section, everything is plug and play except for a couple of easy connections to make at the battery. Where it passes through the firewall, we've got a factory style weatherproof connector. All we've got to do is cut a hole in the firewall so we can join it to the interior section, which features the OBD2 port and the ignition key signals. We've also got some fused accessory and auxiliary circuits and a handful of other connections to make for things like speedometer signal, cruise control, brake switch, stuff like that. We also had BT Diesel Works reflash our factory PCM. Now this has been preloaded with 5 different tunes and it's ready to go. We've got a stock tune, economy tune, towing, street, and a hot race tune. And for the tow tune, the exhaust brake is enabled so you can save some wear and tear on your service brakes by taking advantage of engine compression braking if you happen to be doing some towing. Now to cycle through those 5 switch-on-the-fly tunes, we've got our choice of selectors, either a rectangular style or a round one that'll fit neatly in a gauge pod. Now all this stuff was bench tested before it shipped, so we know we're in good shape. And if we ever need to scan this thing for codes, well, we can use our Matco scanner or any other OBD2 code reader.
When we come back, we'll get our freshly painted cowl hood installed. Stick around.
You want me to hold my side while you get started or vice versa?
Yeah, let me get one in here.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech, where we're in the middle of adding some bolt-on dress-up items to the front end of Project Nightrain.
That's not gonna work, is it?
I managed it.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Now, our original chrome bumper wasn't in horrible shape, but it would have taken too much time and effort to bring it back to life. So we just opted for the easier and cheaper route via Brothers Truck Parts. Ta-da! We also replaced the broken original air dam.
Let's go in here. This billet grill really cleans the front end of this truck up, and we think it suits this style of truck.
We also replaced the factory sealed beam headlights with Brothers Euro Crystal headlights, which have a replaceable high-efficiency white halogen bulb. The lights also come with the pigtails, so you can connect the original wiring with the new bulb.
Now, we painted our OE headlight bezels black to go for the style we're looking for. And after all, this is Project Nightrain.
Now, our cowl hood is a bolt-on, but it does take a little bit of time to get it lined up correctly.
You want me to hold my side while you get started, or vice versa?
There we go.
Should I just slam the hood? Got to test the new guy.
Yeah, we need to go up. I need to go up.
Your side?
You look pretty good.
Hey, buddy.
Hey.
I knew we hired the right guy. Looks good on this side. And I like that color. That hood looks good, too.
It definitely changed the looks of it, didn't it?
Yep.
After the break, Ryan and Jeremy will install our new tonneau cover. And we'll do away with some trim to give our truck a cleaner look.
Instant improvement.
Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, Project Nightrain is starting to look pretty sharp. And like we mentioned earlier, we want to get rid of some of the extra bright work or trim, like the aluminum tread plate bed caps. And since the inside of the bed is kind of rougher than the rest of the truck now, we want to solve this problem easily and affordably with a soft tonneau cover.
They weren't messing around when they put that on there.
The side rails for the tonneau cover mount easily on top of each bed side. They simply clamp into place with the provided hardware. Our black vinyl soft roll-up tonneau cover came from Summit Racing.
Get the side started first.
Now, before you completely tighten down the clamps, go ahead and unroll the tonneau cover and get it all laid out so you can set things up nice and square and looking good.
All right. Yep, we've got to come up towards the cab a little bit, too. Yep, come forward to the cab a little bit. Just without moving that one, tighten down this one.
And once you're happy with how it sits, go ahead and lock everything down.
It didn't move.
We also removed the added-on trim over top of the wheel arch. We think the truck looks a little cleaner with them sitting on the floor. And luckily for us, the last time this truck was painted, the trim wasn't there. So making things look good just required a quick cleanup.
Now we've just finished installing our tonneau cover. Now along with making the outside of this truck look a whole lot better, we've managed to cover up all the ugly inside of the bed. The only thing we weren't able to do was cover up what was under those old aluminum bed caps. Now we could go in, remove that adhesive, try to buff it out, or we could spray our bed rails with a satin black or a bed liner material and be a real inexpensive way to clean it up without having to paint our bed sides.
And with the work we got done today, we're well on our way to having a clean and tough-looking diesel-powered street machine. Now, the next time you see this truck, we're going to be doing some suspension work to get this thing sitting closer to the ground. And we'll throw in some tires and wheels that are a little bit more project appropriate. But this thing's looking pretty good, and I think we're going to keep the new guy.
Today, we're making more progress on Project Nightrain. We're giving our Duramax-powered Chevy 1500 a much better stance with a 2.4 drop, then adding a Dana 60 rear end to handle all the torque from our newly transplanted diesel. And we'll also show you how we made room under the cab for our Allison 1000 transmission. Finally, we're shoeing it with some new wheels and tires. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Today we've got Nightrain back in the shop. It's our 87 Chevy 1500 with a swapped-in Duramax diesel and Allison automatic transmission combo. Now this project's coming along pretty good. We've got the drivetrain in it, the truck's been freshened up a little bit, it's looking a little bit better. But we want to continue that theme and make it even look better yet. We want to lower this truck a few inches, getting it sitting a little closer to the ground, and we'll throw in some project-appropriate tires and wheels.
Now to get that lower stance we're going for, we went over to our buddies at Summit Racing and picked up a few parts. For the front, we went with 2-inch drop spindles, and in the rear, we decided to drop it 4 inches with a pair of shackles and hangers, which had definitely helped the looks of the truck along with the way it handles. And for brakes, we went to Willwood and picked up an entire kit. We went with 14-inch rotors in the front with a 6-piston caliper along with a set of hubs. And in the rear, we went with just shy of a 13-inch rotor with a 4-piston caliper, comes with all the brake pads and hardware to install, and they even send you a box of brake fluid. Be happy not to see these wheels anymore. Disassembly is pretty straightforward. First, we'll start by removing the caliper with the brake pads, followed by the cotter pin and all the hardware. Then we'll give the spindle a couple of whacks at the tie rod end, get that removed, and then we'll loosen up all the bolts at the control arms and remove the entire spindle assembly as one unit. And we throw it in the scrap. Now, since we're putting on all these new shiny parts, we figured since we were in here, we'd go ahead and get all this mess cleaned up and get a fresh coat of paint on everything. And that starts with a pretty heavy dose of Safety Clean's Cleaner degreaser, followed by some elbow grease. I started out with a scraper to remove all the heavy stuff, followed by prepping everything for paint. Then I masked anything I didn't want to get any overspray on. Then I hit it with a fresh coat of VHT Epoxy Black. And since the suspension turned out so well, it made the fender well look that much worse. So I went in, cleaned everything up, hit it with a red scuff pad, then I shot it with a layer of Duplicolor's rubberized undercoating. And since our spindle comes bare, it's prone to rust. So I went ahead and hit it with epoxy black while I was at it. Now you can see how just a little bit of paint really helped out the underside of this old truck. And when installing new suspension parts, don't be cheap and use your old cotter pins. Go out and get a few new ones. Trust me, they're pretty important. Now, even though the hub's already loaded with wheel bearing grease, I like to throw a good coating on the spindle while I'm at it. You can never get too much in there. Now with the hub installed, the next step is to set the bearing preload. And the way I like to do that is to snug it down pretty tight to be sure the bearings seat well onto the spindle. And then back it off just enough to where there's no free play in the hub and still have some freewheel. And here's a good idea. Once you've got the truck back on the ground, run it up and down the street a little bit. Bring it back in the shop and re-inspect your hubs and make sure there's no free play. The Wheelwood kit starts with the caliper bracket, and we'll just snug it down for now because we may have to shim it later. And after the rotor, we'll install these shims that are supplied in the kit for this big 6-piston caliper. And we got lucky. Our caliper centered exactly over the rotor, which allowed us to go ahead and install our brake pads, followed by the retainer bar. Oh, that's perfect. That's great. Brake pad, retainer. And since everything lined up perfectly, I went back and pulled one caliper mounting bracket bolt out at a time and applied a little Loctite, and then torqued to spec. Good. Then we installed our dust cap. I just found a socket that matched the outer diameter and just tapped it into place. Now these definitely aren't the OE shocks, but I can see that they've still been on here for a long time, which is why I had to fight with them for about 20 minutes before I could get them off. But we're gonna swap them out with a set of factory replacement shocks that we picked up at AutoZone. And these I didn't have to fight with at all. They installed in just a couple of minutes. It looks really good. Wheelwood makes some good stuff. Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech and the lowering of Project Nightrain. Now that we've got the front all squared away, it's time to move on to the rear. Now with the axle out of the way, we'll start off by removing the OE spring hanger. And we're gonna use the same method we've always shown you. We're gonna cross-cut the rivet heads, knock them off with the air hammer, and then drive the rest of the rivets out. Not only is this the loudest method, it's also the most effective. The new lowering hanger bolts right back into the factory rivet holes. Instead of removing the entire leaf spring, I'm gonna bolt it back into the new hanger just to retain it while I install the lowering shackle. And since these OE bolts have been in this truck for nearly 30 years, sometimes they can be pretty stubborn. And that's when that loud air hammer comes back into play. And to make room for our new lowering shackles, we have to notch part of the bed frame. And to do that, I like to use the 3-inch cutoff wheels that we get from Industrial Depot. Now I'll clean up the edges with a 3-inch roll-lock disc, blow it out, and then hit it with a little more VHT epoxy black just to prevent any new rust. Now before I can install the new shackle, I'll spray a little WD-40 on the bushings just to help with pressing them in. And our Dake arbor press makes easy work of installing the sleeve. Now I use the top hole on the new shackle to get the maximum drop. And for Nightrain, we opted to go with this Dana 60 from Curry, which is definitely a huge improvement over this old GM 10 bolt. Comes with these beefy 3.5-inch tubes, big bearings, and Curry's 35 spline axles. But a big bonus is what's inside. This is Yukon's 373 ring and pinion and zip blocker. It's their new air locker. And what's cool about this is it's an open differential for good street manners. But at the flip of a switch, we can be 100% locked for the track or just when we need maximum traction. Plus, there's no limited slip additive to worry about or friction modifier. Now, come on down with it. A little more. Okay, stop right there. Yeah. And one of the most important things we need to do is get our axle centered before installing our U-bolts. Now, since our new axle tube is larger in diameter, we had to pick up new U-bolts, and we got ours from AutoZone. Now, before I weld on the leaf purchase, we need to set up the pinion angle. Now, you could set this up on the floor, but I feel the more practical way to do it, especially with our new lower suspension, is to set it up in the truck under the vehicle's full weight. Looks like we're sitting at about 89 degrees and I'm shooting for about 85, so we'll roll the axle up just a little bit. Now with the weight of the vehicle sitting on the axle, it may take a little persuasion to get it correct. But in my opinion, the great thing about using this method is there's no guessing. Perfect. Now our axle came shipped coated in oil to prevent it from rusting, so I'm going to clean that off with a little lacquer thinner before I'm ready to weld the perch on. Now with it tacked in place, I dropped the axle down just to give me enough room to permanently weld it in. Now we had to remove our axle shaft to install our Willwood emergency brake, but the great thing about this axle, no C-clips. Now, just like the front, we'll start off with a caliper bracket. We'll get it bolted into place, then we'll go back, use a little Loctite, and torque to spec. And twice in a row, we got lucky. Our caliper slid right into place, and we didn't have to shim anything. Now the next time you see Nightrain, we'll get our hard lines and Willwood's extended brake lines installed. Cool, that looks really good. Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Now that we've got our suspension all buttoned up, there's something under the truck I wanted you to check out. Now you'll remember that Ryan installed this Duramax engine in this big Allison transmission. He had to cut the floor of the truck out just to get it in. Since then, I've gone back in, raised the tunnel up a little bit, and re-sheet metaled everything. Here's how I did it. Now, I grabbed the tunnel that Ryan had previously cut out, and I started by removing the excess material off the back of the panel. Then I stripped the paint off to have good metal to weld to. Now, I was happy with the way the front of the tunnel lined up to the firewall, and back in the rear, I used a roll of 1.5-inch tape to get the clearance I needed over the big Allison transmission. Now, using some thin cardboard, I made some templates to see how much metal would be needed to fill the gaps. For both the driver and passenger side, I taped a piece of cardboard in underneath. Then I came back and traced it out on the top to get an accurate template. All right, there's our driver template. Now, before removing your templates, be sure to mark what's top, bottom, front, and back. Okay, we can cut some metal. Now I'm going to use our Woodward Fab shear, but you can also accomplish this job with a cutoff wheel. Now using a few magnets to hold our piece in place, we can start tacking it in. And if need be, we can use a body hammer to finesse it and get the metal where we want it. Now remember, when you're tack welding, to be sure to jump around. It doesn't take much to warp this thin sheet metal. Now with everything in place, it's only about another 1,000 tack welds to get it all welded up. Now since then, I've gotten the transmission tunnel metal finished and in primer, and since it's not removable, we may be able to sneak in underneath to get to those few bell housing bolts, but if not, that's as simple as drilling a few holes and a few body plugs. Well, this thing's about ready for a rubber mat or some carpet. Now for wheels for Project Nightrain, we went to revwheels.com and picked up these classic Rev 100s. Now they come in a few different finishes, but we opted for chrome just to go with that nice classic look. We went with a 20x8 up front and a 20x9.5 in the rear. And for tires, we went with Toyo Proxy STs. Not only are they a great looking tread pattern, they're going to give us some good traction, and we're going to need it for the amount of torque we're putting down. It's going to look really cool with our new lowered stance. And for the rear, we wanted to stuff as much rubber as we possibly could under this truck, so we went with a 295/40. And since we're gonna have this truck out in all types of weather conditions, we needed an all-season tire. So this tire will definitely do what we need it to, along with being known for a really quiet ride. Check this out, Project Nightrain's starting to look pretty awesome with some of these parts we've thrown at it, and we're really digging the stance. But what I think's cool about this truck is nothing gives it away that it's a diesel. It looks like a fairly common 1500 pickup, so it's definitely gonna surprise some people. And since this is Project Nightrain, I went ahead and blacked out some of this chrome just to go more along with the name. And the next time you guys see this truck, I'm gonna see if we can get her to make some noise.
Today, we'll fire up Project Nightrain for the first time. We're running new fuel lines, adding a fuel cooler, and installing our tank. Then we're building our exhaust from a kit before heading over to advanced plating to get our wheels looking right. And finally, we'll put the fire to our Duramax engine. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. We're back on Project Nightrain. Now, as cool as this project is, it hasn't made a sound yet. So we're gonna get it all wired up, throw some fuel at it, and see if we can get this engine to make some noise.
This whole pile of parts is what it's going to take to make that happen. We're going to start by running a feed and return fuel line, as well as installing all the necessary fittings to make the connections. In the return side of the fuel line, we're going to be installing this fuel cooler, and we'll explain why we're going to do that in just a little bit. Now, the key to making this engine swap successful is this wiring harness from BT Diesel Works. Now, we simply sent them our existing wiring harness, and they modified it by taking out all the things that we wouldn't need. They also provided a tune in the engine computer so that it could run in standalone operation. Now, because this is a diesel, we're going to need a lot of amperage to get the thing started up. We ordered a pair of Optima red top batteries that'll provide the cranking current to get this thing fired. But until we get some fuel to this thing, it's not going anywhere. Because we're using AN style fittings and hoses, the tips of the factory hard lines need to be cut off. Now, anytime you cut a steel or aluminum hardline, it's very important that you deburr the fresh edge both inside and out. I'm using a -8 compression union on the feed side. The nut is followed by the brass ferrule, and then the fitting is screwed together. Now these compression fittings make a great seal on these relatively low pressure feed and return lines. Now it's a -6 fitting on the return side. Now the seal is made when the relatively soft ferrule is compressed into the hard line. This also means that no thread sealant is required. When adding the ends onto our braided fuel line, start by threading the nut onto the hose. With that done, it's important to secure the nut so it just doesn't spin on the end of the hose. You then thread the remaining part of the fitting together and you're done. A great tip I've learned over the years is to take a piece of welding wire or a zip tie and jam it in the end of the hose. Now this will let you know if the hose has collapsed on itself. Good to go. When routing any sort of fluid line, be mindful to avoid any hot surfaces or sharp edges that might damage your hose down the road. Now you don't have to get out the breaker bar when you're tightening these fittings, just snug them up. Now this is an auxiliary transmission cooler we picked up from Summit. Now I'm going to modify it and install the fuel cooler on top and rely on the fan to cool them both. Now the reason we need a fuel cooler is because the extreme pressures in the fuel rail will heat up the fuel. Now if we didn't install a fuel cooler, the entire contents of the tank would heat up, we'd get a check engine light, and we would have reduced performance. I'm using these 1¼ inch stainless steel spacers to provide a little bit of air gap between the two coolers so they don't rub into each other, potentially causing leaks. Now, using the brackets provided in the transmission cooler kit, I'm going to mount the whole assembly. Now, I didn't mess up here. I offset the upper bracket on purpose to accommodate the step in the frame and allow both coolers to sit level. Now, there are many types of fittings in the automotive world, but it's very critical that you only use Teflon tape or thread sealant on tapered pipe thread, also known as NPT. Now, because this style of fitting won't swivel after it's installed, it's important that you determine ahead of time where you need them clocked. Back under the truck, I'm going to temporarily install this piece of angle iron bracket in which I pre-drilled holes to mount the cooler. Now, once I'm happy with the final position, I can permanently install the bracket to the frame and the cooler to the bracket. It's important that I didn't install the cooler directly against the floor of the bed. I utilized this gap between the bed rails to allow for adequate airflow. A while back, Ryan mounted the fuel tank for Project Nightrain between the frame rails, but there's one small modification that we've had to do since. Now, this fuel tank was intended to be run in a carbureted application. Now, that just means there was no provision for a fuel return line. To solve that, we simply drilled in and welded an aluminum -6 AN fitting. Now, since then, I've also installed the fuel level sending unit as well as the fuel tank vent. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is trimming the fuel filler neck to the right length, and that'll complete the installation for good.
After the break, we'll run our fuel lines down the frame rail. And later, we'll get our LBZ engine fired up for the very first time. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech and the first time fire up of Project Nightrain. Now that we've got our filler neck installed in the bed, it's time to reinstall the modified fuel tank. It's important to mention the hose we're using for the fuel filler neck isn't a radiator hose. It's a specially formulated rubber specifically for fuel filler necks. Before we install our fuel lines on these freshly boxed frame rails, we're going to take a moment and clean them up so we can protect them from the elements. With the paint dry, I like to use these handy magnetic zip tie holders to allow me to temporarily route the lines. This allows me to determine the correct length to make the fuel lines as well as find a safe path to route them. The great thing about these magnetic clips is they're easy to remove one at a time as you replace them with your permanent mounting solution. This will keep the fuel line exactly where you want it. Now, we're not building a show truck here, so instead of spending big bucks on some fancy billet aluminum or molded plastic hose clamp, we're using these simple cushion clamps. They're inexpensive, easy to find, and they'll mount the hose securely in rubber. They install with a simple sheet metal screw. I'm facing the two clamps towards each other so they share a single mounting point and provide consistent spacing for the lines. And it's not a show truck, but we do still care about how it's going to look. This is why clocking the fittings on the fuel cooler earlier was so important. The return line from the engine to the cooler goes into the back port, and the line from the fuel cooler to the tank goes into the front port. This allows for clean routing of the hoses without any kinking. More zip ties hold everything in place. The return line installs in the newly added port on the top of the tank, and the feed line installs in the pre-installed port on the bottom. Zip ties are a mechanic's best friend. Just remember to trim the tails.
And that's the fuel system.
One of the last important steps on Project Nightrain is finishing the exhaust. Now, obviously, you can't go down to your local parts store and pick up a kit that'll fit an '87 Chevy with a Duramax in it. So I did the next best thing. I called up Summit Racing and they sent me this 4-inch exhaust for a 2007 Duramax powered Silverado. Now, obviously there's a lot of material here, probably more than we're going to use, but we'll get a little bit creative and we'll rearrange the pieces and we'll make it work perfectly. With the front pipe trimmed to clear the cross member, I use a V-bend clamp to attach it to the factory downpipe. For the middle pipe, I have two challenges. Number one, I have to clear the cross member. And number two, I have to raise the pipe up to follow the transition of the frame rail and maintain adequate ground clearance. To achieve this, I'm cutting the straight section out of this bend and welding the two curved pieces together. This will give me the 3 inches of height that I'm after. I've mounted the muffler on some stands and put a straight piece of pipe in the front of it, which my bend will connect to. I simply have to mark it and take it to the welding table and tack it all together. Here's something I learned the hard way. This aluminized steel is a very dirty material. If you don't take the time to properly clean and prepare the surface, the coating can burn off and contaminate the weld. This will make it difficult to get a quality finished product. Since the alignment of these two large pieces will be difficult to duplicate on the welding table, I'm using a MIG to tack them into place. After I'm done mocking up the whole system, I'll remove it and finish weld it with the TIG. When it comes to making custom exhaust hangers, sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. A little bit of heat will help you bend these hangers any which way you'd like. To make a compound bend, be sure to let the first bend cool thoroughly before you heat and bend the second one. This will keep the first bend exactly where you intended it. This style of hanger can be welded directly to the muffler. Now, a good rule of thumb to follow is attach a hanger on each end of the muffler, but on opposite sides of the pipe. This will prevent any twisting in the exhaust system. And with a little bit of luck and some planning, this unmodified tailpipe from the kit ended up fitting perfectly.
When we come back, we're headed to advanced plating. Stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Now you know on Project Nightrain, we've been trying to black out everything we can. Now even though we love our bright and shiny wheels, we thought we'd come down to our buddies at Advanced Plating and see what they could do for us. Now we've been coming over to our buddies at Advanced Plating for a long time, and in our opinion, they do some of the best chrome plating in the world. And in addition to their regular chrome, they have a really cool process they call black nickel. Now it starts with a regular chrome piece that gets thoroughly rinsed and then dipped in the black nickel tank. And the process doesn't take very long. Our Chevy valve cover will sit in the tank for around 3 minutes before it comes out with this nice smoky look. Now, as cool as this process is, let's face it, Nightrain's a work truck and she's probably gonna get abused. So the guys at Advanced Plating had a suggestion for a finish that would better suit our needs.
Believe it or not, they recommended a new powder coat finish called motor oil. This will give us the same look as the black nickel, but be much more durable. After a thorough cleaning of our one-piece Rev wheels, they are rolled into the spray booth where the powder coat is applied. Now, our powder coat is designed to go directly over a chrome finish, and when it's first applied, it kind of looks like primer. But after a couple hours in the oven, that'll all change. Now, the recipe for our wheels calls for 350 degrees for 4 hours. We didn't have to look too far to get an idea of what our wheels will look like when they're done. Right outside the oven was Jesse Greening's XL27 Roadster. This is his daily driver, and much like us, he wanted a good-looking finish that was also durable.
The reaction I had when I first seen these things were just incredible. I mean, it was like, okay, this is something original, something unique. It's been a very durable finish and super easy to clean. Actually, I like it the best because actually those wheels are probably incredibly dirty right now. You just don't notice it. And that's perfect for me because I'm the world's worst at keeping a car clean.
Steve and the guys at Advanced Plating have been working on an even more durable finish using the process of vapor deposition. They're experimenting by using this process on smaller guitar parts that take a lot of abuse.
In the past, black chrome and gold, satin nickel, bright nickel have been very fragile. With new technology and the use of vapor deposition, which is a chamber under extreme heat, vacuum, and ion exchange, we're able to put a top coat on that is durable and offers a lifetime warranty. This vapor deposition deposit never oxidizes. It will stay bright from the time you put it on your car to driving down the road in the rain, having your car in storage. There's no polishing or waxing.
Now this dream scenario is not that far away. Advanced Plating believes they'll have this refined enough that they'll be applying it to car parts. But for now, we're stoked at how our wheels turned out with this new motor oil powder coat. And in our opinion, they look just like the black nickel.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech and the first time fire up of Project Nightrain. We're going to temporarily reinstall our BT Dieselworks engine control harness onto the engine. The great thing about this harness is it plugs directly into these two large factory connectors. It takes all the guesswork out. The engine probably wouldn't run very well without an accelerator pedal, so we're going to temporarily install it on top of the air conditioning compressor bracket. The last ingredient we need to fire this engine is fuel. Now, because the entire fuel system is brand new and filled with air, we need to replace that all with fuel. So up on the fuel filter housing, there's a bleeder screw and a priming pump. You simply have to loosen the bleeder screw and pump until you see a steady stream of fuel come out with no air bubbles in it. Then you simply have to clean up your mess and you're ready to see if it'll start. Now that's a major milestone. Now, we do have a lot of work left to do to get this thing roadworthy, including adding a cooling system and, of course, relocating this accelerator pedal. We've rolled Project Nightrain back into the shop, and we're going to fix up the interior just a little bit. Now, under the hood where our Duramax sits, we're going to add an intake, intercooler, and see if we can finish up some of the plumbing.
And we've also started back on our 55 F100 project. Now, I've been working hard, and I've got the cab back into primer, along with getting the bed ready as well. But for today, I need a break from doing body work.
Totally agree. Before Jeremy gets started on the interior of Project Nightrain, I'm going to be up front finishing up some of the plumbing. You'll remember that Project Nightrain is our 87 Chevy 1500 that we're swapping in an LBZ 6.6 liter Duramax engine and Allison 1000 automatic transmission. Last time you guys saw the engine, we had just barely got it started. At that point, the wiring harness was just kind of thrown on top of the engine. Nothing was permanent. Since then, I've taken the time to organize the wires, kind of route everything in nice, safe places, and get all the components mounted like the computer and the transmission control module. The next biggest problem that we found out was the stock intake. The Y-bridge and intake pipe was just way too tall. There was no way it was going to clear the stock hood. I pulled a page from the old school Hot Rodder's handbook and took a little bit of modeling clay and stuck it on top of the alternator. Once I shut the hood on top and compress it, I'll measure, and this will give me the maximum height the intake can be. I'll probably leave about a ½ inch clearance for the intake below this level. After doing a little bit of research, I found pusher intakes, and they were willing to manufacture us some custom intake parts that'll fit below the stock hood. Using the measurements I provided them, they gave us a version of their Supermax Y-bridge, their HD charge pipe, and the newest offering, their turbo inlet. Now, for you guys at home who have a late model Duramax powered Silverado, you can get the same kind of technology from them that offers up to a 92% increase in flow. While you can choose from up to 9 different colors of powder coat or a natural finish, we ordered the titanium gray.
Now, the interior in this truck was trashed. You can see through the years of people climbing in and out over this old seat fabric how it's taken its toll. There's just not much left there, along with the foam losing its shape, and it's just gotten flat. Now, our dash is in the same shape that our seat was, which is pretty common for this style truck. They dry rot over the years, they start to bust, and they get really lumpy. Now, you could send this thing out and have somebody recover it for you, but that gets pretty expensive. You could also attempt it yourself because you have this metal base to start with. But lucky for us, LMC Truck makes restoration parts for a lot of different classic trucks, including our 73 through 87 1500 pickup. Whether it's GM, Ford, or Dodge, LMC Truck has been the go-to source for hard-to-find or obsolete parts for the past 35 years. Headquartered just outside Kansas City, LMC customers are able to call, go online, or visit their showroom and choose from over 30,000 parts in their inventory. And today, that inventory keeps growing. LMC Truck maintains a serious collection of early and late model trucks and SUVs, which doubles as a test bed for thousands of parts they manufacture themselves. One nice thing I like is LMC's catalogs are more like shop manuals, with detailed photography and schematic diagrams to help guide you through the restoration process. And since our interior is basically bare, we ordered a molded plastic cover to take care of the dash, new carpet, and new foam and vinyl for the bench seat. Since we're not going to be reusing this cover for any reason, we'll go ahead and just cut it off. Now, once you've got your foam removed, this is a great time to go ahead and inspect your seat frame for any damage or anything like that. Now, as you can see, someone's already replaced a couple of springs here. Now, normally what I would do is go ahead and clean everything up and get a fresh coat of paint on it. But since there's no rust anywhere and it's so nice, there's no need to do that. But our seat back, it's injected molded from the factory, and no one's making replacement foam for the 81 through 87 pickup. So looks like we're pretty much stuck with it. Go ahead and get this thing covered. It's not a bad idea to go ahead and pull a measurement on your frame and find your center point. And once you make that mark, do the same on your foam and your seat cover as well. This way, if you start working with it and it gets off at all, you can refer back to your marks. Yep, look pretty good.
Back at the front of Project Nightrain, these are all the parts that we're going to need to finish up the cooling system on our Duramax. We're going to start by installing the intercooler that we picked up from Summit Racing. I got out the welder and I built these custom mounts that the lower part of the intercooler will bolt to. I also had to trim a little bit of sheet metal, and also to accommodate the 4-inch core of the intercooler, I had to cut and reinforce the edges of the core support. Now this will all let the intercooler sit behind the grill. To make the connections at the intercooler, I just used some leftover 3-inch stainless mandrel bent exhaust tubing and welded them up to make the right shape. And on the aluminum tube on the engine side, all I had to do was cut the end and just give it a little bit of a twist. Due to the unique cooling requirements and odd hose size of our Duramax diesel engine, an off-the-shelf radiator just wasn't going to cut it. I sent an email over to Performance Rod and Custom Radiator in Boonville, Indiana, and they sent me this beautiful hand-fabricated aluminum radiator. It has oversized Dash 10 transmission cooler fittings and a large 2-inch lower outlet that matches up with the Duramax radiator hose. When we combine it with the dual 16-inch spout electric cooling fans they provided, there's no way this radiator is going to have any problems keeping that engine cool. Best part is, it installs right in the factory location. I knew that the stock lower Duramax radiator hose just wasn't going to fit. It was way too long, had a bunch of funny fittings on it, and a special O-ring connector at the end. Rather than going to the parts store and fishing through a back room of radiator hoses trying to find one that might or might not work, I'm just going to build my own from 1 3/4 stainless steel. Had to weld in a nipple for the coolant reservoir. I got everything finished welded and gave it a nice coat of satin clear.
Next, how to get your shifter off the column and onto the floor. Stay tuned.
We're back on Truck Tech for our last full day buttoning up Project Nightrain by finishing the cooling system and refreshing the 1500's interior. With the seat fully covered,
Looks really good.
Jeremy can move on to addressing this worn-out dash.
Even though we're going to install a new dash cover on here, we want to go ahead and knock down some of these high spots. That way we ensure that our new cover stays good and flat. This isn't as bad as it looks, and it's not beyond repair. The reason we chose to go ahead and put a new dash cover on it is because it's a very inexpensive way to make it look really good. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Why in the world am I painting a dash that I'm going to cover up? But the answer's simple. This dash was blue, and I don't want any of that sneaking in on us.
The last two things we need to fabricate for Project Nightrain are mounts for our shifter and accelerator pedal. We can't use the column shift on this truck because the Allison transmission is just so large, there was no room to run the linkage. So I picked up this floor shift from Summit Racing. It's made for a car, so I'm just going to come up with some way to space it up off the floor just a little bit. After that, I'll take care of mounting the accelerator pedal. Based on the height of our seat, our shifter needed to be 4.5 inches off the floor. It also needed to be mounted firmly but allow the carpet to pass underneath without having to cut giant holes in our new rug. I decided on a mitered bridge style base. I used some thin wall square tubing and cut the center section to the same length as the base of the shifter. Then I'll mark and drill 4 holes. I'll cut each end at an angle, then weld in some 1/4-inch nuts to make the shifter removable. The legs are cut to length also at an angle. Then I can TIG weld the whole thing together for a nice, clean, industrial look.
It looks really good. Makes it look like a brand new one. Now, a good way to do this is to go ahead and mount the dash in the truck. This way we know we get the cover exactly where we want it to be. All right, slide this thing in here. There's just a few clips towards the front of the dash that slide through slots in the framing. A few screws secure it. Silicone adhesive is dabbed on the original to hold the new LMC dash cover in place. We'll use sandbags to hold it down until it hardens.
To mount our shifter pedestal in the cab, this 1x1 angle iron will attach to the floor of the truck, leaving about 3/8 of an inch for the carpet to go over. Our bench seat goes in temporarily to determine the front to back position to mount the shifter. And with it out, I can weld the tabs to the floor permanently. The very last bit of fabrication is going to be a mount for the throttle pedal. Now, because of the contour of the firewall and the offset in the throttle pedal, there's no flat real estate that I can just bolt it straight to. So I'm going to start by tracing the outline of this throttle pedal onto the steel, and then when I drill the holes, I'm going to weld the nut straight to the back side of it. I'm then going to mount the plate to the firewall on the edge that will actually make contact. Then I'll have a little bit of a brace to fill in the gap on the right-hand side where the firewall contours in. Once everything is tacked into place, I can double check the positioning. Then I can burn it in for good.
Now I've got the inside of the cab all masked off, and we're done with all the modifications we're going to do to our floor. So we're going to spray on a couple of coats of this sound control by Lizard Skin to try to keep out as much noise and vibration as possible from that big diesel engine we swapped in. We've also got this Super Pro application kit. It comes with the gun, the mil thickness gauge, and the mixer. But what's really cool is they send you this 90-degree head so you can spray in those really hard to get to areas. Lizard Skin recommends that you don't spray their sound control over bare metal, so I've primed a few spots that needed attention. This material takes 75 minutes to dry, 24 hours to fully cure.
We'll finish up the cooling system with some extended life antifreeze from AutoZone.
Then our carpet from LMC Truck can go in. Followed by our custom shifter pedestal.
All right, let's get this bad boy in.
Then the bench seat can go in for the final time, followed by the accelerator pedal.
One of the challenges of installing this newer electronically controlled engine into an older vehicle like this Chevy is instrumentation. All the gauges in our dashboard are mechanical, and the Duramax engine has no place to mount their sending units. A great example would be the speedometer. It's mechanically driven by a cable, yet the Allison transmission has no cable drive built into it. A good thing to keep in mind, though, is all vehicles manufactured after 1996 have all the information that your gauges would normally display recorded by the computer and sent to the OBD2 port underneath the dashboard. A great way to display all that information is with this Edge Insight CTS2 multi-gauge monitor. It's plug and play straight into the OBD2 port, and can be configured to display a variety of readings like boost pressure, water temperature, RPM, even gear position, and of course the vehicle's speed. The 5-inch full-color high-resolution touchscreen is easy to read at a glance. It's even light sensitive, so it will automatically dim at night and won't blind you. Our truck's computer is already tuned for bigger power. For you diesel guys out there wanting a boost in performance though, you should check out Edge's Evolution CTS2. It has all the same great monitoring features as the Insight, but will also give your truck a boost of up to 180 horsepower over stock. They have applications for all the major brands, plus they're compatible with external accessories like a backup camera or a pyrometer. Today we've made some great progress on Project Nightrain. This thing's pretty much ready to hit the road, we just got to finish up a few details. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll get the grill, the hood back on it, and maybe even do a spray-in bed liner. Man, what do you say we take this thing to the drag strip?
You know what, I bet if we get this thing to hook up, it'll probably run some pretty decent times.
Yeah, I think it'll be awesome. But I'm not riding with you. I've seen you drive.
What are you talking about?
We're swapping cams and burning the balonies. First, as our diesel night train project gets paid off at the drag strip. Today's truck tech is a hot one.
Today is an exciting day at Truck Tech. We're going to finish up the last few details on Project Nightrain and finally get this thing out on the road and make some smoke.
We're also going to kick off a new project called White Noise. We're going to take this bone stock 2010 LS powered Silverado and we're going to transform it into a high performance yet daily driven street missile.
Well, don't get carried away just yet. Before you start tearing into another motor, what do we have left to do on Nightrain?
Well, we got to throw a Driveshaft in it. It's not going to go very far without one of those.
And I think the last paint issue I want to address is that oxidized roof. I definitely think we can take care of that.
Let's get to it. All the power in the world won't do you any good unless you've got a good quality Driveshaft to send it to the ground. Because our truck has an Allison 1000 transmission with a fixed output yoke and a custom Dana 60 axle, a special driveline was required for our project. We took a couple measurements and we gave Denny's Driveshaft a call. They sent us this 3.5-inch 1410 off-road slip yoke driveshaft. To cope with the torque of the Duramax, Denny uses genuine Dana Spicer 1410X sealed universal joints, which are stronger than standard greasable ones. They have a lifetime seal so water and dirt won't get in, and because they're not drilled for a Zerk fitting, there's no weak point for cracks to start. The drive shaft is computer balanced so it will operate smoothly at high speeds, and believe me, we're going to try it out.
Should be all clear.
Well, tell me what's going on with this paint, Jeremy. This looks pretty bad.
Yeah, well, there are a few reasons that can cause this. One's just not good adhesion between the clear coat and the color coat, just not making a good bond, you know. The next can be just not a good quality clear. They just don't have the adhesion capabilities as a good clear. And then lastly, and what I believe we have going on here, is just UV damage. Sun just eats away at it over time.
It's been sitting outside for a long time then.
Yeah, I believe it has. And for you guys at home that's got a car that sits outside a lot, a good way to prevent this is just give it a coat of wax a couple of times a year. You may not be in this situation. We say we get it masked up.
All right.
The first thing we're going to do in the prep booth is roughly mask the truck so the good paint won't be covered with sanding dust. We will start by using a DA with 180 grit paper to get rid of the bad clear coat. Well, after we've gotten up here and started sanding on the roof, we've noticed we've got a couple of dents. Now, since we're already here, we may as well fix them. You go ahead and get that nice shiny paint on there with a couple of dents, well, you're probably going to regret it later. To work the dents, I'm going to use our Matco stud gun. I'll zap a stud right into the center of the dent and slowly start working it back out with the puller. When you have a dent like this, it usually crowns around the outer edge. So a good tip is while pulling pressure up on the puller, take a body hammer and slowly massage the outer crown back towards the center of the area you're working. This helps the metal go right back where it came from. Once we're happy with the metal, we can spread a skim coat of filler. Next, block down the filler and it's ready for primer. For primer on Nightrain, we're going to use PPG K38 2K urethane surfacer. Now this is not a direct-to-metal primer, but since we didn't hit any metal anywhere, it's okay to use this over a well-prepped OE surface. Plus, since we filler worked a few dents up there, we need a good high build to go over the top of it. I like to spray this in 3 wet coats, and that gives us excellent build to block out any imperfections. Once the primer is fully cured, we can wipe on guide coat and start sanding. After blocking down the primer surfacer with 180, then 320, we can get it in the paint booth and remask. Now, fortunately for us on this truck and with many older trucks, we have this factory seam line. What that allows for us to do is tape right into it. This way we can base and clear to that tape and you'll never notice it. If we didn't have a factory seam like this, we would probably end up having to paint most of the cab or at least blend in down at the body line. And the rest of the masking on the roof is pretty straightforward. Then the only blending we'll have to do is down the A-pillar. This way the paint transitions evenly. You'll never notice we painted it, and it'll look like a brand new truck. Now, I see a lot of guys that'll fold their masking paper over like this and just stick a piece of tape here. What this can end up creating is a place to hold your trash. So you're blowing your paint and you get air pressure in here and you're blowing dust out all over your paint job. We'll show you a good tip on how to prevent that. Instead, use smaller pieces and tape over the straight edges after trimming with a razor. Then there are no pockets for the debris to collect and blow back into your paint. I like to do a test spray out on masking paper to make sure the paint is coming out of the gun properly with a nice even flow. I'm also looking for a 10 to 12 inch fan pattern out of the gun. I'm spraying PPG Ocean Blue. I like to spray this at about 30 psi and lay down 3 coats. With a metallic paint, you want to make sure your passes are consistent along with keeping the same distance from the panel. If not, it's very easy to make the paint inconsistent or blotchy. After about a 20-minute flash time, we're ready for clear. Here, we're using PPG 2021, also laying down 3 coats at about 40 psi. This clear has great UV protection, so we won't have this deterioration problem again. We will get it unmasked and out of the booth and take a look at our finished product.
See how you did.
Not too bad.
No, it looks way better.
Looks pretty good. That's just what you can do in a weekend.
Yeah, and your tape lines are hidden, just like you said.
Yep.
I'll keep you around.
Well, thanks.
Next, hang on to your hats.
Well, man, we're out on the road today in Project Nightrain finally after all this time. And you know what? This truck is a blast to drive. From the outside, you really have no idea what this truck's all about. It just looks like any other 87 Chevy short box, maybe, you know, with a fuel-injected V8.
Yep, and I can't tell you how many people have stopped us and said, hey man, that thing got a 350 in it, but you know, it's a total sleeper, and that's what I dig about it. I mean, it's got great looks too. That's another thing I like about it. Not only do we have that modern power now with a diesel and all that torque, but we have that old school look with this old box Chevy, and I really dig the stance since we lowered it with that 2.4 drop. I mean, it's got a nice rake to it.
Absolutely.
Reminds you of that old school truck, you know?
Yeah, I mean, for a 200,000 plus mile motor, this thing is actually very responsive. And you know what? It's almost bone stock too. We've really only got a few mods. We've got a tuner on it, got a custom intake, but it's a stock engine, stock fuel pump, stock turbo, even a stock transmission.
Well, it feels like it has a ton of torque.
Oh, for sure.
Lay it down.
See what it's got.
Yeah,
man, that Curry axle we stuck in the back there, I'm glad we went with a Dana 60 because with the amount of torque this Duramax is put into the ground, we definitely need it.
Yep.
And when we take it to the track, that air locker just might come in handy.
May have a little trouble getting some traction, but...
Well, you know what? We have 5 different tune settings to choose from, so I think we can find something that we can make stick.
Sure, I say we should try them all.
And lucky for us, Music City Raceway is in our neighborhood. Owner Rick Gonzalez opened up the gates and prepped the track for a few runs down the 8th mile. Well, we put a few miles on Project Nightrain, and we couldn't be happier with how it's turned out. Everything's working perfectly. Now, to really put it through its paces, we've come out to this 8th mile drag strip. We see if we can run some decent times through it.
Yeah, we're super excited. This is the moment we've been waiting for. What do you say we flip for who drives first?
All right, you flip. I'll call it.
Call it in the air.
Heads.
Hey, man. At least give me my coin
See,
back.
it even was heads. We're not here to try and break any records. We're here for a safe, controlled environment where we can throw down the hammer on our diesel half-ton. Let's go. Because after all, that's what you guys do. Drive to work Monday through Friday, and on Friday and Saturday nights to the drag strip to go head-to-head with your buddies for a cold beer and bragging rights. Well, the first run on street tires was pretty good. Spun a little bit out of the hole, so we'll try a softer launch and see if we can get a faster mile per hour. After the first couple runs, I'm actually really impressed for what we've essentially built with a mostly stock motor with almost 200,000 miles on it. It's got the BT Diesel Works tuning in it, which adds a little bit of horsepower. For the most part, a truck that'll put down an 1/8 of a mile drag strip run at about 82 miles an hour. For me, I'm impressed for the first time out. I'm gonna hand the reins over to Jeremy and see what he thinks of it. Man, that feels good.
It pulls good on the big end, man.
82 miles an hour.
82 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Right off the starting line, the truck has really good pull, but I was very impressed when you get about halfway down the track, the truck starts building boost, it just throws you back in the seat. Feels like it's never gonna end.
You get squirrely? He got squirrely that time. I could tell he turned up the boost a little bit, spun right off the line.
All in all, a great day at the track, a satisfying build. Ready?
Yep, hit it.
And a cherry on top to end it.
Woohoo! Yeah, baby. Keep it going. Keep your foot in it. I'm pretty sure we could have no tire left.
Man, you can't beat that.
Watch the tailgate.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's a burnout.
That was a little more fun to run it down in a straight line.
Yeah.